That's a heater. Stand up here and sweat. All right. Again, Isaiah 15. And it is true, I don't look like pastor. All right. We've been going through certain very specific prophecies about neighboring nations in Isaiah. Some of these prophecies deal with events that are going to occur in fairly rapid time frame from the date of the prophecy. Some reach beyond to much later events, including some reaching to events that have not yet occurred. Isaiah 15 and 16 deal with Moab, and in the middle of it, in the first few verses of chapter 16, are some references to messianic prophecies, okay? Kingdom prophecies. But if you look, just to get a sense of the timing, look at chapter 16, verses 13 and 14. It says, "This is the word that the Lord has spoken concerning Moab since that time. But now the Lord has spoken, saying, within 3 years, as the years of an hireling, and the glory of Moab shall be contemned, and all that great multitude and the remnant shall be very small and feeble." So the near fulfillment of this prophecy occurred within 3 years of it. And in fact, it did. I believe it was Sennacherib's invasion that destroyed Moab. And so it is primarily about that. Now, we want to lay a little bit of background and context for this. We're dealing with the nation of Moab, right? So who was that? Anyone? Descendants of Lot? Yeah? Does anyone know where they were located? Okay, the southwestern Jordan today. So it's right on the border of Israel, the southern border. Not all the way down, but about half of Moab borders the east side of the Dead Sea. Okay, and then it runs a couple hundred miles to the east, and then drops down to another half of Moab south of the Dead Sea. And so that's its general location. The Moabites were descendants of a man named Moab. So turn to Genesis chapter 19. Now, when Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, God pulled Lot out before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. He pulled out 3 other people as well: Lot's wife and 2 of his daughters, the 2 that were still living at home, the ones he had offered to the mob. So those are the 4 people that the angels brought outside of the city of Sodom and sat outside of it and told them not to look back but to flee to the mountains. Well, and then they begged to be allowed to flee to a smaller city called Zoar. Isn't it not a little one? And the angels relented and said, fine, that city won't be destroyed, but all the others will. And so as they began to flee, the destruction came, and of course Lot's wife, she looked back, right? And the Bible tells us she was turned into a pillar of salt, and that was her end. Then Lot and his daughters panicked, and instead of going into Zoar, the city they had asked for permission to go to, they ran into the mountains anyway. And that's what ended up happening. So you see verse 30, "And Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountains, and his 2 daughters with him. For he feared to dwell in Zoar. And he dwelt in a cave, he and his 2 daughters." Now, why would he fear to dwell in Zoar? I don't know exactly. I think maybe the people of Zoar, they're Canaanites, same people that lived in Sodom and Gomorrah and the rest of the cities of the plain. He survived this, and everyone else died. And so there might have been a sense among those people that he was himself the cause or a threat of some kind. It's irrational, I know. But think about what did the people of Israel do when Korah and his family was swallowed by the earth? Anyone remember? Remember, the earth opened up and swallowed them alive. They went down to hell alive. Right? And then the next day, the very next morning, what did the people of Israel do? Anyone? They blamed Moses. They said, you killed the people of the Lord. Like he'd opened the ground up and had them swallowed. And so people aren't always rational when they blame people for things, and I think that might have been Lot's problem here. He might also have just been scared of God doing it again. But in any event, that's where they were. They were hiding in a cave in the mountains, he and his two daughters. And the firstborn said unto the younger, our father is old, and there is not a man in the earth to come in unto us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him that we may preserve seed of our father. Now this is incest, of course, it's wicked. But the Bible does not hide the truth. It is what it is. Now, why would they do this? Well, in those days especially, preserving your family line mattered. It was a very big deal. And of course, these women wanted to have children. That's what most women historically wanted to have. Really, it's only since the recent advent of feminism in the last probably 40 years that has changed within our culture. Right. And within a few other cultures like Japan and places like that. And it's not a good thing. It's disastrous. Birth rates are plummeting. Societies and cultures are not going to survive because they're not having children. You know, everyone is supposed to do their part, okay? Unless you don't think your culture is worth preserving, and that's what's happened, is people just don't think it is. How many of you ever heard, well, I'm not going to have kids. Who wants to bring a kid into this horrible world? You ever hear that? What a bunch of nonsense. Well, bring your kid in and work to change it, and teach your kid to help change it. Change it by doing the right thing, okay? Not environmental nonsense, not racist nonsense, just the right thing. But that's really just an excuse. The real reason is they're selfish. That's what it is. Okay, it's just pure narcissism. Okay, what is the reality of having children? And for those children that are in the room, I'm not saying this to pick on you, because it's not meant that way. But what is the reality for having children? Right, and what do you end up having to give up? A lot of what? Time? What's that? Resources. Time, money, resources, that's money. Huh? Freedom? Yeah, for women. They got to go through this birth process. It is no joke. Okay? So, yeah, children, and it's years, right? Decades. So having children is not, an easy thing for people to do if they take it at all seriously. I mean, it's a real sacrifice. Absolutely worth it, children. Amen. Okay? Absolutely worth it. Any person who's actually had children and spent time trying to raise them will tell you they are glad they did. They would not give up a single one of their children. Okay? They're absolutely worth it. But before you've had them, if you're selfish and you're looking ahead, you're thinking, I want to take vacations. I want to go on 3 vacations a year. I want to have a second home, a vacation home, right? Can you do that once you've had a bunch of kids? No, right? They want to have a job where they don't have to kill themselves to make a living. Well, what happens when you have a bunch of kids? Men, you got to work hard. You got to find a job that can provide for all of them. That's what you have to do. It's your job, right? No one else is going to do it. And God expects you to do it anyway. And so you do. Now, all of this is good, actually, and it's for our good. Meanwhile, the women have to raise the children and spend all their time with them and try to teach them and feed them and provide for them. And this is not an easy thing. And so it's pure selfishness. That's all it is. People want to save their money. They want to go on trips. They want to have fun. They don't want to be tied down. They don't want to be limited. And so they come up with nonsense excuses. Okay, but that's what it is. They just don't care. Now, it's also motivated by the fact that our society or our culture has decided having children doesn't matter much. And there are a lot of reasons that are articulated within our culture for it, right? Women enslave mothers. Okay, that's one of the arguments, right? That women can't succeed in their careers if they have to take care of children. And
having children contributes to global warming.
right, then you have the environmental wackiness, right? Just complete insanity. But yes, that's absolutely true. There's limited resources, and the more children you have, the more of the resources you're taking, you thief, right? And you're also destroying the earth at the same time. Okay, now all of that is nonsense, but nevertheless, it's taught to people. It's taught to them from the youngest ages. You hear it in the news. You hear it in television shows and movies, throughout social media. And so we now have reached a place where, this is a shocking number, more than half of American women have not had a child by the time they're 30. Think about that. Once you get to 30, it becomes hard to have children. Not impossible, but harder, significantly harder. And by the time you're at 40, you're done, except for the weird random event, okay, or major medical intervention. Okay, that's just how it is. So you want to have children, ladies, you got to have them in your 20s, basically. Now, you can have children in your 30s, but your chance, the number percentage chance, because of the way the bodies work, it drops dramatically. And so what they do is they convince young women that what they really want to be is a lawyer, right? That's what they want to be. They want to be a lawyer or a cop or a pilot or a sniper, you know, some really cool job. And then by the time they reach 30 to 35, they realize, I hate this. But now it's too late. The dice, they've been cast. And you're now locked into this. Good luck finding a husband at that point that actually wants to have children with you, because if you've got a husband, it's probably a guy that the two of you talked about this, and he doesn't want kids. That's why he married you. He wants you to make the money you're making. And he'll make the money he's making, so the two of you can share that and have fun. Men, they don't have this biological drive that women do. I say biological, it's not really biological, it's in the soul. It's part of how women are made by God. But women have it, and then they reach this point they want to have kids, and now that ship has sailed. Okay? And so this is a real problem for our society. Back in these days, women were desperate to have children. You see it all through the Old Testament, right? What happened with Jacob's wives? Anyone remember that? There's Leah and Rebecca, right? And then the two handmaids, and what is it? What were their names? I can't remember. Zipporah, is that one of them? Anyway, they're two handmaidens. And he ended up having 12 sons with them. But at the beginning of their marriage, who had all the children? Leah. Right, including Judah. And that's an important, and well, Levi too. But Judah, that's an important one, right? Because who comes from that line? Right. So she has 4 children, and it upsets Rebecca. You know, she's got no kids. Her sister's got all these kids. She can't give her husband any children. It bothered her terribly. And it made a mess in their family, of course, because he was married to 2 women. It's absolutely ridiculous. But you can see the importance of having children in that conflict, right? What about Hannah in 1 Samuel? Desperate for children. Her husband was also married to 2 women, and the other woman would mock Hannah because she had had children and Hannah hadn't. That's a nice home. Do you remember what Elkanah said to her when she wanted to have children? It's what I always say to my wife. Am I not worth 10 sons to you? Or am I not better than 10 sons? I think is what he says. So, of course, he was married to 2 women, so it's a different animal. So no, he wasn't better than 10 sons. She wanted children. And this is God's command anyway. Go forth, be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth. That command has never been revoked. It's to all of us. And that was given to Noah and his family. Who did we all descend from? Noah. Probably everyone in here is also descended from Japheth, primarily. But we all descended from Noah. And that's who that covenant was with. That means it's with us. We are responsible to have children. Now, I'm not telling you you've got to destroy your life. If having a child is going to kill you, or there's a very high risk of that, I think it makes perfect sense not to. There are people God has made not to marry. Right? Eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake, as Paul says. And there are people who never marry. They used to be called old maids and confirmed bachelors. Many of them, of course, were secretly queer, but there were people that they just never married, for whatever reason. And I'm not saying every person in that situation is wrong. There are also married people who can't have children. They get married, and then they just can't have kids. And that's a bad thing, right? This is not a good thing. That's a bad thing. There are husbands and wives who spend enormous amounts of resources trying to figure out what the problem is so they can have some children. So what we should do is want to have families and want children. You don't want children in isolation, okay? Single motherhood, terrible idea. Terrible idea. It's destroying our country. You want families, husbands and wives, committed to one another, who have children together. Okay? That's what we want. That's what builds a nation, builds a culture. Now, in this case, they aren't going to have that. These two women, they just wanted to have descendants. They wanted their family line to continue, and so they committed incest with their father. And look at verse 36. Thus were both the daughters of Lot with child by their father. And the firstborn bare a son and called his name Moab. The same is the father of the Moabites unto this day. And the younger, she also bare a son and called his name Ben-Ami. That Ben means son of, okay? The same is the father of the children of Ammon unto this day. So Ami became Ammon. Moab became Moabites. It's the Moabites and Ammonites. Those two families, or those two nations that were neighbors of Israel, are relatives of Israel, right? Abraham, Lot was his nephew. They were part of the same family. And, of course, the children of Israel are straight descendants of Abraham. So these are their relatives, okay? So that's who Moab is. Now, they were on the border of Israel, and they were nothing but a snare and a problem. It's sad that it had to be that way, but they were. Now, I would point out the Amorites are not the Ammonites. Those are different people, okay, or different tribes anyway. The Amorites are Canaanites, and they were just north of Ammon. Okay, so you had Amorites up here, and then Ammonites. This is all going down the Jordan River, and they're on the east side of it. So you had the Amorites in the north, the Ammonites in the middle, the Moabites in the south, and then below them, another group out in the desert, all by itself, the Edomites. And who'd they come from? Esau. Yeah, they're descendants of Esau. Esau is Edom. Okay, that's what the Bible says. Okay, so the Edomites were the descendants of Esau. So the Edomites were also Israel's relatives, closer relatives than the Moabites and the Ammonites. Okay, the Amorites were not relatives at all, and they wiped them out of existence. Okay, when they came into the land. So that's who Moab is. Now, given that we know where Moab came from and who they are, now go to Deuteronomy chapter 2. And look at verse 9. Now this is Moses at the end, just before the people are going to enter the land, and Moses is about to pass away. He's giving them a lot of people call it the second giving of the law. That's why the term Deuteronomy is on it, as in second. But the reality is there's some of that, but it's actually much more a summary, okay, of Israel's history and some very important terms of the law. And then he includes several prophecies in Deuteronomy that are very important. including the ones about Israel's future. But here in chapter 2, verse 9, Moses speaking says, "And the Lord said unto me, distress not the Moabites, neither contend with them in battle, for I will not give thee of their land for a possession. Because I have given Ar," that's a city that's in Moab, "unto the children of Lot for a possession." So who put the Moabites where they were? God did that. He gives Israel the same instructions about the Ammonites and about the Edomites. He says, that land is theirs. It's not yours. You can't have it. I give it to them. For all three of those nations. Now, interestingly, Israel just wanted to pass through these nations. They were not going to fight with them because God had told them not to. Did any of the nations just allow them to pass through? No, they came out and fought with them. Idiots, right? And what happened? They lost badly. And then Israel moved on. But Israel did not conquer them or take their land. Didn't burn their cities, didn't make slaves out of anyone, didn't kill women and children, didn't destroy everything. They just fought the army, won, and then moved on. Okay, because God said, leave them alone. And so they did. And he did that because of their relationship to Abraham, I believe. I think that's clear. God made many nations out of Abraham. Okay, now, he didn't make Moab and Ammon out of Abraham, but he did make Israel and Edom and all of the every Arab in the world, to some degree, is descended from Abraham. Not all through Ishmael. He had those 5 sons of Keturah as well. But they come from his line. Okay, and there are, 21 nations that are Arabic today? So God made many nations out of Abraham. He said he was going to, and he did. And he's given each one the land they're in. Today, Moab, Edom, and Ammon are all contained within the country of Jordan, okay, which we call the kingdom, or it is called the kingdom of Jordan. And it's an Arabic country. And in the end times, it will attack Israel again. So we see that God, you can go back to Isaiah now, that God not only cared about Moab, he provided for them. Now, who did the Moabites worship? Does anyone remember? Did they worship Jehovah? No, they did not. Who's the abomination of the Moabites? Chemosh, which is the other name of Molech. So it's Molech. Okay, that's how we all know the name is Molech. But Chemosh is the one that's the name given to Molech by the Moabites. That's who they worshipped. Now, Molech, because that's the name I'm going to use for him, he was a bloodthirsty demon. Now, we've talked before, the New Testament tells us, these old gods, they're real. They're demons. That's what they are. Paul says, know ye not that the things the Gentiles sacrifice unto idols, they sacrifice unto devils. That's what he says. So these beings are real. Zeus is real. He's just a demon. There are no other gods but God. But there are a lot of other beings, right? And they exist and they do things. The priests of Baal, Pastor talked about it this morning, the priests of Baal, they expected Baal to answer. They thought fire was going to come out of the sky and consume the offering. Why would they think of that? Because they'd probably seen it before. Probably had happened. Because Baal is real. He's just a demon. Now, when Elijah set up the contest, Elijah's trust was that God would make sure Baal couldn't answer, which is, in fact, what happened. And then Elijah mocked them. Yell louder. Mayhap he's asleep, right? I'm sure Baal was desperate to answer, but he wasn't allowed to. Now, they worship Molech. Molech is a bloodthirsty demon. And his primary ceremonial rite was the sacrifice of what? of children. They killed their own children. They sacrificed them to this demon. Okay? And they would do it by, he was represented by a giant bull-headed man, and they would make these big iron or brass or bronze, depending on where they were at in the world, statues of him with a furnace in the belly. And the hands hold, like this, right above the opening of the furnace. And then they would lay the infant in the hands and stoke the fire. And the baby didn't burn immediately. The heat had to travel through the metal to get to the hands. It was also coming out, heating from below. They roasted. That is who Moab worshipped. So, just to give you an idea of what they were like. Now, when Israel did come into the land, just before they entered, they were in the area of the Amorites and all that, or just getting ready to attack, and everyone remembers Balaam, right? And he counseled someone, and who was that he counseled? Balak, who was king of Moab. So who was it that sent the women into the tents of Israel to seduce the men and cause them to commit fornication and adultery and worship their gods? It was Balaam. It was the nation of Moab. That's who was doing it. So now you've got all the background that you need to know about who Moab is. They do fight with Israel all the time. If you read through 1st, 2nd Samuel, Judges, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and Kings, you'll see that they fight wars with Moab repeatedly. Oftentimes they win, sometimes they lose. They being Israel. But they were a continual thorn and a problem. So we see here in chapter 15 the beginning of a 2-chapter prophecy about Moab. We're just going to do chapter 15 today. The burden of Moab. Because in the night, Ar of Moab is laid waste and brought to silence. Remember, we saw Ar mentioned in that other passage. That was the primary city of Moab. And brought to silence. Because in the night, Kir of Moab is laid waste and brought to silence. He has gone up to Bajith and to Dibon, the high places to weep. Moab shall howl over Nebo and over Medeba. On all their heads shall be baldness, and every beard cut off. The cutting off a beard was a symbol of shame. Okay? Men grew their beards out in those days, all of them. Not just a few odd ducks like we have today. Verse 3, in their streets they shall gird themselves with sackcloth. On the tops of their houses and in their streets everyone shall howl, weeping abundantly. And Heshbon shall cry, and Elialah, their voice shall be heard, even unto Jahaz. Therefore the armed soldiers of Moab shall cry out. His life shall be grievous unto him. My heart shall cry out for Moab. Who's writing this? Isaiah, but who's really giving it to him? Who's doing the talking? God. And right here in the middle of this is judgment. He's bringing judgment on Moab. He's going to destroy it. Do you see what he says about it? My heart shall cry out for Moab. So, did Jehovah love Moab? Yeah, he did. Despite everything we discussed, he loved Moab. It mattered to him what happened to them, but they would not repent. His fugitives shall flee unto Zoar. Remember that city? They're going back to where they came from. An heifer of 3 years old, that has to do with sacrifice, okay? A sacrificial heifer. For by the mounting up of Luhith, with weeping shall they go up. For in the way of Horonaim they shall raise up a cry of destruction. For the waters of Nimrim shall be desolate, for the hay is withered away, the grass faileth, there is no green thing. Therefore the abundance they have gotten, and that which they have laid up, shall they carry away to the brook of the willows. For the cry is gone round about the borders of Moab, the howling thereof unto Eglaim, and the howling thereof unto Beer Elam. For the waters of Dimon shall be full of blood, for I will bring more upon Dimon, lions upon him that escapeth of Moab, and upon the remnant of the land. So he opens this, you'll notice he mentions several locations, These are all geographic locations within the country of Moab, except Zoar, which was on the other side of the Dead Sea. It was in Israel, or in Judah. But notice what he says about these locations. Now, this is the burden of Moab, but did God write it to Moab? Who's the message for? It's for Israel. This is a message to Israel, but it's about Moab. Why would God tell Israel what he's going to do to Moab? Okay, there's the warning piece. Yep, I think that's absolutely true. Anything else? Well, I think it has to do with who's deciding who stands and who falls, right? Moab trusted itself, its safety, to its own gods, its false gods, just like all the pagan countries did, right? But they also had a pretty valiant and serious army. And they had a bunch of fortresses and hills, rocky mountain areas, where it was not easy to take that place. So in this opening verse, it says, because in the night, Ar of Moab is laid waste. Most people consider Ar to be the capital of Moab. It was not. It was just the largest city. And it's right on the northern border. It's right on the edge. So this big city, the largest city of Moab, is taken in the middle of the night. That happened. That's what happened. It fell at night while everyone was asleep. And then it's laid waste and brought to silence. And then notice what it says, because in the night Kir of Moab is laid waste and brought to silence. What's Kir of Moab? Well, Kir was a fortress. The word Kir means walled, and the word Ar means awakening. All of these names in these days had meanings, and it's sometimes instructive and interesting to look at. Kir means walled. That was a fortress built on a hill that was a short distance from Ar, and it was really its defenses. It wasn't around Ar, but if you took Ar without taking Kir, then they would drive you back out the next morning, because that's where the garrison was, and it was a fortress. But what happened? Well, the verse tells us, Kir's taken first in the middle of the night without warning, and then Ar. Okay? What that did was leave Moab open to invasion. Okay? Their forward defenses were now open. And of course, Sennacherib and his armies just moved on in. Each of these cities listed here were taken. Most of them were destroyed, burned to the ground. Everyone either killed or taken into slavery, and depending on what value they could bring. And it was just refugees running for their lives by the end. That's the prophecy that is described here, and that is what happened. Now it says he has gone up to Bajith. That means a house, and it's a reference to the temple of Chemosh. That was the term the Israelis, or the people of Judah, gave to the temple of Chemosh. They called it Bajith, which just means house. In other words, it was sort of a scornful way to refer to it. But he's gone there. Why did he go there? Well, obviously, to ask for his God to intervene. Right? And then he's gone to Dibon. Dibon is the capital. That's the actual capital. And it was a walled city as well. And so Moab, the people of Moab, when those first two cities fall, the biggest city and the fortress that was there to defend it, they flee to two primary places. Their temples, to get their God out there to help them, and to the capital city where they hope their army and the walls will succeed in defeating this invasion once it gets to them. They go to the high places to weep. Moab shall howl over Nebo. That's a mountain that's in Moab. And over Medeba, that's a small lake, and it just means water of peace. On all their heads shall be baldness, and every beard cut off. Those were actions they would take to display their sorrow and their desire for their God to act. When in Israel, whenever a king or some other member of the nation knew that God was judging them, what would they put on? Sackcloth. Right. That was an outward expression. It was supposed to be an outward expression of what you felt inside. It was telling everyone what's happening to me is my own fault. That's what it was saying, because I have neglected or disobeyed God. Well, every other nation did the same thing, just towards their God, not the God. Okay? And so that's what they're doing. The people of Moab are desperately calling on their God to intervene. Verse 3, in their streets they shall gird themselves with sackcloth. Okay, so verse 4. And Heshbon, which means fatness, shall cry, and Elialah, which is the waters of peace. Their voice shall be heard even unto Jahaz. And that word means to be trodden down. It's an actual city in Moab that was far to the south. So therefore the armed soldiers of Moab shall cry out, and his life shall be grievous unto him. That means the soldiers themselves will not be able to fight effectively. Now you remember in Deuteronomy, God promised Israel if they would obey, what would happen when they faced their enemies? Their enemies would flee. Right? 10 of you will chase 100, and 100 of you will chase 1,000, and so on. That's what he said. And then he reversed it. He said, if you don't obey, this is what's going to happen. And it was the reverse of that. Now, what does that mean? Well, I think it has to do with courage. Men have their own will, and some of them are courageous. Lost men can be very courageous. Okay? But if God has decided your army's going to run, you're not going to have courage. The man who's supposed to have kept watch in Kir that night, or men, they clearly weren't doing their job. Right? Because God had pronounced judgment. So you can set all the watches and guards you want. It's not going to matter. They're going to fall asleep. They're going to be looking the wrong direction. They're not going to be paying enough attention. They're going to get taken out before they can raise a warning. Or they're going to get bought off and let them in. Something's going to happen because God has said it's going to happen. And that's how armies fight, when you look at it from God's standpoint, right? Keeping that in mind, keep your finger here because we're coming right back. Turn over to Proverbs chapter 21. Look at verse 29. A wicked man hardeneth his face, but as for the upright, he directeth his way. And, Grant will get to this when he gets there, but this is like many of the verses in Proverbs where you have the contrast set up. Sometimes it's the same lesson in two verses reinforced or explained in a different way. Sometimes it's a contrast. More often it's a contrast, but not always. Here it's the contrast, and what that says is a wicked man hardeneth his face. What does that mean? It means he won't repent. He won't listen to rebuke. Okay, he just hardens against it. The one underneath it, but as for the upright, he directeth his way. That's a person who listens to the rebukes of the Lord and corrects his path. Okay? And then this is connected with the next two verses. There is no wisdom, nor understanding, nor counsel against the Lord. Now what that means is all the things said in this world that are designed to call into question the authority of God, His existence, His power, His grace, His mercy, His love. All the things that are designed to attack His word and call Him a liar, and they know what they're calling Him. They have no wisdom, no understanding, and their counsel is useless. So sometimes you will hear people say, and I used to think this when I was younger, I've actually changed my position on this based on some events, but I used to think, okay, look, that Dawkins character over in England, who is a evolutionary biologist and an atheist, I would never listen to him about the things God speaks on, right? And I never did. But I still thought, he's a pretty, he can be a smart man. He can have intelligence. He can be very capable at what he does. But I've changed my mind on that. They're not smart, and they are not capable. You may think they are just because they have the ability to do higher order math or something, but really they're not. There is no wisdom and there is no understanding there at all. So recently I saw him on an interview where he said he was very disappointed in England because people had stopped going to church. And all of these beautiful chapels and church buildings they had in England, all these Anglican churches, were empty and being turned back to the government for use in some other form, most of them being torn down, because they have no people there anymore. And that distressed him. He wanted those buildings around because he'd grown up with them around. Further, he didn't want to live in a country where he heard the call to prayer 5 times a day. This is what he said. He goes, if I'm in London, I hear the call to prayer 5 times a day. I don't want to hear that. That's not my nation. That's not England. And then he went on to say, Christmas is about, you have to have some kind of Christian, or you don't have Christmas. And Christmas is great. I love the Christmas hymns and the Christmas songs. And I'm sitting there listening to this thinking, you've spent your entire life mocking everyone who believed any of that. And now you want to act like you're disappointed? I mean, this is what I mean. No wisdom, no understanding, and no counsel. His counsel has led, along with many others, he's not alone, to England's church really being absolutely devoid of any truth at all. There was a time when some Anglicans were the real deal. Okay? Low church Anglicans in the 17 and 1800s, they were real believers. Their doctrine was a mess, I know, but they were real believers who believed the gospel and who gave it to people. Okay, John and Charles Wesley. What's his name that was with him? Whitfield. Those guys, they were Anglicans. They became Methodists later, not John. He died before that ever happened. But Charles and the other guy became Methodists, and then they split over Methodist doctrine, which makes sense because none of them were sound in their doctrine. But man, they preached the gospel, and a lot of people got saved. And preachers from that church, that's what led to the Welsh revival. Okay? Which, by the way, didn't just affect Wales. It affected us. Because a lot of those people emigrated here and brought it with them. So, the Anglican Church used to be a real church in the sense that it had within it real believers. It was never really a real church. But it had within it real believers in the gospel who were serious about giving it to people. And that is the church that produced this. King James Bible. They weren't only Anglicans. There were some Presbyterians and Baptists involved in that as well, but they were primarily Anglicans. Okay? Because it was the Church of England. Right? That's what Anglican means. Here we call them Episcopal. Same thing. But there's no counsel, no wisdom. And then you see verse 31. And that's why these previous two verses matter. The horse is prepared against the day of battle, but safety is of the Lord. Now, we've talked about this before, and so I'm just going to reiterate it. The horse in those days, the war horses of those days, don't exist anymore on this earth. Okay? They were bred specially for this, and then they were trained for it. And the training itself was a 10-year process. An immense investment into creating a single war horse. You can't get a horse today to run into a line of bayonets. Right? If you lined up a group of bayonets or spears, a horse won't run onto that. They see it, it scares them. They're not going to run onto that. War horses would. They'd dive right through it. Kicking and biting and attacking everything within reach. Okay? And they were bonded to the men who rode them. And so they were, for their era, that's the tank of the ancient world. Okay? This is why God told Israel they were not to multiply horses unto themselves. Because it would make them rely on their army, not on him. Okay? What did Solomon do? Went back to Egypt to get horses, war horses. That's specifically what he was getting. These were horses that would kill people with their bites and kicks. They were mean, horrible things. Now, we continued to have war horses all the way up until gunpowder. And then we basically got rid of that that whole idea, because the investment no longer made any sense. Okay, because a single bullet put the horse down. You can spend 15 years raising, training, and breeding a very specific horse and get him all ready and send him out there, and the first moron serf with a gun will shoot it, and it dies. So guns changed all that. But that's how it was then. Okay? And so when he talks about the horses prepared against the day of battle, he's talking about the most dangerous weapon of that era. And so what he's saying here is, I don't care what your weaponry is. It does not matter. The result, the outcome of this battle will be decided by the Lord. And it always has been. I mean, every battle. That doesn't mean human beings don't have a job to play or a role in that. We do. Sometimes it's our failure to play the role that is what God uses to bring about the result he wants. Sometimes, it's amazing, little tiny groups have succeeded in wars that they shouldn't have won. There's no way Mao should have gotten China. That should never have happened. But it did happen. So, that's what God wanted, for whatever reason. So, knowing this, then when you go back to these prophecies about Edom in Isaiah, you see what God is saying. It doesn't matter what their defenses were, how powerful they were, anything. None of that mattered. He had pronounced judgment. They're going to lose. That was the end of it. It did, however, hurt his heart. My heart shall cry out for Moab. Verse 5. His fugitives shall flee unto Zoar, an heifer of 3 years old. For by the mounting up of Luhith, and that that word Luhith there is elevated. That has to do with going up to high places to do sacrifices. With weeping shall they go it up, for in the way of Horonaim they shall raise up a cry of destruction. For the waters of Nimrim, and that word Nimrim means valiant, but it's an actual city named Nimrim, and it had a river that ran through it, shall be desolate, for the hay is withered away, the grass faileth, there is no green thing. So he's going to cut off their water in the middle of this. They're not even going to have their normal water. Therefore the abundance they have gotten, and that which they have laid up, shall they carry away to the brook of the willows. And that is, I believe, the River Jordan. So if you remember, well, I'm not going to go into it. David at one point fought Moab down there near the mulberry trees, all that. That was in this location. For the cry has gone round about the borders of Moab, the howling thereof unto Eglaim, and the howling thereof unto Beer Elam. That Beer Elam is Wall of Heroes. For the waters of Dimon shall be full of blood. Now that Dimon, that's a play on words in Hebrew. So remember, the capital was the city of Dibon, with a B, for us, right? Here, it's the same word, but they've changed it just slightly to be Dimon. And why would the writer do that? Well, because Dimon is a Hebrew word that means blood. And so, for the waters of Dimon, or Dibon, shall be full of blood, for I will bring more upon Dimon, lions upon him that escapeth of Moab, and upon the remnant of the land. So those that survive this invasion and flee, the refugees, are they going to escape? No. God's going to bring literal wild animals out to make sure they don't. Terrible thing. Okay? He made such pronouncements on other nations as well in the past. If you go back and read in the law, as well as in Joshua and Judges, you'll see animals and insects were used to destroy whole nations, including Egypt. Remember that? Plague of flies, could you imagine? I hate those things. Anyway, so this is the opening portion. On Wednesday, we'll look at least the next 5 verses, which has to do with the Lord and his return and some things that are going to happen in the kingdom age. And how is that tied up with Moab? Well, the Bible tells us that Moab is going to be part of the coalition attacking Israel at the end, under the beast. He's part of the kings of the south, okay? And the Lord is going to go down there and deal with them himself, the hard way. And Moab is going to be destroyed ultimately entirely, except for those few who do repent. And there will be a remnant of Moab. There's not a remnant of some nations, but there that we see in prophecy. Moab, I believe, if I remember correctly, is one of them that does have a remnant. So there will be some descendants of Moab in the kingdom. But we'll look at the rest of it next week. Now, the verses 6, or on Wednesday, 6 to 12 goes back to Moab, talks again about it. And this is, again, it's basically a repeat. He doesn't go through the same details, but it's a pronouncement of judgment on Moab. I believe the first part is the specifics about the invasion. The second part, which is certainly applicable to the invasion, reaches ahead to their judgment later. So, all right. Any questions? All right, you're free to go.